And welcome back. My next guest is Sidney Germansky, a World War II veteran. Thank you for joining us, Sidney.
Thank you.
So, Sidney, I'm delighted to have you on this program. And really, it's an honor for me to have you on the program, knowing what I know about you. And I'm so happy that we're going to be able to have our viewers and the residents of Clarkstown learn a little bit more about Sidney Germansky and what you've done in service to our country. So before we begin, let's just talk a little bit about where you're from, Sidney, your background, where you were born and where you were raised.
Well, I was born in New York City, 110th Street, Harlem, 92 years ago. And we moved up to Rockland County in '63, and we've been here ever since, and spent 13 years here in New City, which is God's country to us. We enjoyed it very much. So, people here are very good.
So, Sidney, you're a World War II veteran.
Yes.
How did you join the service? Were you drafted? Did you volunteer?
Well, at 17, I joined the National Guard, and then a year later, I went into the service. And that's when the headache started.
Mm-hmm. Where did you do your basic training?
I started out in Massachusetts, Camp Edwards, because we were doing boat training, invasion barges, and steel tugs. Mm-hmm. And then from that area, we moved down to Camp Gordon Johnson in Florida, where there was more water around, and we took a lot of boat training down there. Mm-hmm. And then from that point, we went overseas. We went to New York City, then went on to the Louis Pasteur ship to Europe, and that was the start of the European tour.
Yeah, and where did you end up in?
We ended up in Plymouth, England, and we were stationed in Devonport Park, along with the British Marines on the other side. And that's when the real headache started. We were called out on a mission, a very dangerous mission in the English Channel. We were looking for a barge, a 100-foot steel barge that was floating free in the English Channel. And at that time, the commander didn't tell us what was on the barge, and he says he needs to volunteer. There was 9 of us on the tug. And I tell him, well, I was a young kid, and so I says, I'll go. I'll do the job. So when we finally located the barge, the water was very rough. The barge was going up and down with the tug, up and down. So I waited until the barge would go up and then go down, and I would jump onto the barge. And that's where I tied up the line and pulled in a 2-inch hawser. And the tug went away about 200 yards. And I was left on the tug. And it was raining. It was a heavy rainfall, and it was a miserable weather. So I went down in the hold of the barge, and I was shocked at what I saw. The sawdust was covered the floor, and hundreds of cases of nitroglycerin was in. Says, holy mackerel, boy! I ran back up on deck. I said, I better not stay in the hold. If that went off, it would have blown up Rockland County and Westchester. There was so much nitroglycerin in there. So when we returned to the tug, the English took over the tow. So we got back on the tug, and the company commander, my commander on the tug, Lieutenant Gus Lawson, says, you did a fine job, and I'm going to put you in for 3 stars and a cross. And then what happened is, when we got back to my company commander, he was not a nice man. So he says, I'm putting in Sidney for 3 stars and a cross. And the company commander said, don't make me laugh. This Jew bastard's not going to get the Medal of Honor through me. Now get out of my tent. So we went out of the tent. It was disturbing, but I couldn't say anything. So 3 weeks later, thanks to Lieutenant Gislason, a major came down from headquarters and presented me with the Distinguished Service Cross and the Bronze Star for valor, and said the Medal of Honor comes from higher up, meaning the President. Mm-hmm. So I'm waiting. I'm 92 years old. This happened in 1945. Mm-hmm. That's a long wait. Yeah. So now they're going to give it to me. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about what happens next in your service, because you were injured in
I was injured 5 times, but the biggest happening to me was when I got a ride from a Red Ball Express, supply trucks. They brought me up to a front line where there's a lot of Germans around, and just as I came into the area, the French Commandos were parachuting in from England. Mm-hmm. So I had the opportunity to fight alongside them, and they were terrific soldiers. Anybody says that the French are babies, they're wrong, because they were terrific fighters. And I was with them like I was one of them. When it was all over and all the Germans were killed, the French captain said to me, "Sidney, you're my best soldier." I says, "I'm your best Jewish commando." And he laughed, and he took a medal off his jacket from World War I. He was 55 years old. And he pinned it on my jacket. He says, "I'm going to bring you back to your company." So, excuse me. So he brought me back to my outfit, and my company commander said, "Oh, he's here again. He's got a death wish. If the captain didn't bring you back, I would have had you hung. Now get back to your tent." I got back to my tent for a half hour, and then I took off again. Mm-hmm. The last time I took off was the worst time. Mm-hmm. It was the last confrontation. I never want to go through that again. I took a ride just up south of Bastogne, the town, and went through a little forest. When I came up on the road, 3 German soldiers had their rifles pointed at me. So I put down my carbine, threw my hands up, and I said to myself, "Sidney, this is the end." So they started to question me in German. I was able to understand a little bit of it. And because I didn't answer them, they began to beat me with their rifles. So they broke my back and they broke my chest. And one of them smashed the back of my head, and I went out cold in the snow. It was freezing weather. So when the graves registration people came along to pick up the dead Americans, they saw I was still alive. And thank God, they brought me to a hospital, a local field hospital, where they began to thaw out my legs because they were frozen like ice. Mm. And I spent 2.5 years in a hospital, in different hospitals in Germany and France, until I went home. It was quite an ordeal. I don't want to go through that again. The beating was, I can feel it today. Mm-hmm. Being butchered by 3 German soldiers with their rifles, no man should go through that. So, this is what made me blind and paralyzed. But I'm still going. I'm going to be 93 in March. I'm still going strong. I've been writing for the last 43 years. All I can do is write. And I use a recorder to record my work, and my wife is a great help to me. Without her, I'm finished.
So I have two of your books here. So we have
one of the books, my time in combat. Mm-hmm. I took notes while I was in combat. I always wrote notes down, and I had 2 little pads. And I never thought that I would put that into a book until I came home. And that's when I wrote my time in combat. And the second book was Katya. It was published by Amazon Press. That was about the Russians. The Russians don't like that book. because I destroyed all their KGB and the Prime Minister. I got a third book coming out in a couple of weeks. It's about the ambassador's wife, a very raunchy book. Most of my books are raunchy. I can't help it. It's how I write.
But I've enjoyed going through your book about your time in combat.
They didn't do a good editing job on it, but they took part of the story out. It was a little bit too rough to describe all the killings.
But Sidney, I want to thank you. You're the epitome of what it means to sacrifice. You know, as a young man joining, you know, and doing your time, and the valor that you demonstrated. But
I do it again.
Thank you.
Knowing what happened to me, I still do it again. I have something in my pocket I have to show you. If I can fish it out. This is what I fought for.
Yes.
I carry this all the time. That's what saved me. Every time I was in some confrontation, I would take out that little flag and I'd say, help me. And it did. It sounds a little buggy, but it worked.
Well, Sidney, that's what it really means. I mean, you had a fascinating life, you know, at 92, almost 93 years young. A life of sacrifice and a life of service. And I'm honored to have you, to call you a friend, and I'm honored to have you as a guest here on our program.
Now, one thing I neglected to tell you.
Sure.
I was just made an honorary Marine, which is the greatest honor in the world for a soldier. I was made an honorary Marine shortly, a little while back, by the Marine League. And I have a request to ask them, when I die, I'd like to have a Marine ceremony.
Well, we'll certainly pass that on to the folks in the Marine Corps League.
The Marine Corps League, the present league, this Colonel Leitao is the one that's behind me. He's been with me all the time. The Marines were wonderful to me all through my problem. And that's the way it is. Like I say, I'd do it all over again. It may sound foolish, but it's my country, and I love it, and I'll fight for it. And that's how I feel. And it's a great honor to be here with you, George. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Sidney, it's about all the time we have for this segment, but I am so grateful that you took the time to talk a little bit about your story. If folks want to get a hold of your books, they can get them through Amazon. They can get them online.
The first one I can get through the internet. The second one, it's through Amazon Press.
Through Amazon. So, My Time in Combat, you can, if you Google it, you can find it on the internet.
Yes.
And Katya, you can get through Amazon Press.
Yeah. And the third book is coming out shortly.
Great. So we'll have to keep our viewers up to date as to when your third book is coming up. And I want to thank you for the gift of the books, and I've enjoyed going through them. I had them on my office table in my office. But again, Sidney, thank you not only for being my guest, but thank you for your service and your example for all of us to our country. Thank you.
Thank you what you do.
Thank you.